The stagecoach hit a rut in the dusty road, and Helena Harris gripped the worn leather seat beneath her, willing her hands to stop trembling as the Wyoming plains stretched endlessly before her like an ocean of grass and sagebrush. She had boarded in Denver 3 days ago with nothing but a single carpet bag, $43 sewn into the hem of her dress, and the desperate hope that the man who had killed her brother would never think to look for her in a place as remote as Snake River. The town was barely a speck on the map, situated along the winding river that gave it its name, and that was exactly what she needed. Invisibility. A chance to disappear into the vastness of the frontier and become someone new. The other passengers had given up trying to make conversation with her after the first few hours. She kept her bonnet pulled low, her eyes fixed on her folded hands, and answered questions with one-word responses that discouraged further inquiry. Let them think her rude or strange. It was safer than the truth. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Snake River on that scorching July afternoon in 1879, Helena felt both relief and dread twist in her stomach. The town was smaller than she had imagined, just a handful of weathered buildings lining a single muddy street. A general store, a saloon, a church with peeling white paint, and what looked like a boarding house with a crooked sign that read Mrs. Patterson's Rooms for Rent. Beyond the town, rolling hills dotted with cattle stretched toward distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. Helena climbed down from the stagecoach on unsteady legs, her traveling dress coated in dust, despite her best efforts to stay clean. The driver tossed her carpetbag down without ceremony, and she caught it against her chest, looking around uncertainly. A few townspeople paused in their daily routines to stare at the newcomer. She could feel their curious eyes taking in every detail, wondering who she was and what had brought her to their isolated corner of Wyoming. "You need directions, miss." The stagecoach driver was already preparing to depart, eager to reach his next destination before nightfall. "The boarding house, please," Helena said quietly. He pointed to the building she had already spotted. "Mrs. Patterson runs a decent establishment. She will treat you fair if you have coin." Helena nodded her thanks and started walking toward the boarding house, acutely aware of the attention she was drawing. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough to warrant gossip, and she needed to establish herself quickly before too many questions were asked. She had rehearsed her story during the long journey from Denver. She was a widow, newly bereaved, seeking a fresh start away from painful memories. It was close enough to the truth to be convincing, even if the details were fabricated. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She looked Helena up and down with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen every type of person pass through her doors. "Rooms $2 a week. Meals included if you eat what I cook when I cook it," Mrs. Patterson announced. "No gentlemen callers, no drinking, and if you are running from the law, I will have the sheriff on you before you can blink." "I am not running from the law," Helena said, which was technically true. She was running from a murderer, which was an entirely different matter. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "You have the look of someone who has seen trouble." "I will not pry into your business if you do not make your business my problem. You need work," the question caught Helena off guard. Yes, I will need employment." "Can you cook? So, what skills do you have?" Helena thought quickly. She had been raised in a comfortable Philadelphia household with servants to handle the domestic work, but her mother had insisted she learn practical skills nonetheless. After her parents died of fever when she was 16, she had spent 3 years keeping house for her older brother Thomas until that terrible night 2 months ago when everything had fallen apart. "I can cook and clean. I can read and write. I worked as a housekeeper back east. Reading and writing is more than most folks around here can claim, Mrs. Patterson said with a grunt. The Quillan Ranch has been looking for help since old Martha died last winter. Carter Quillan is the owner, a decent man even if he is rough around the edges. He needs someone to manage his household because he and his hands are useless at anything that does not involve cattle or horses. The work is hard, but he pays fair wages. Helena's chest tightened at the mention of the ranch. Being isolated on a property outside of town would make her even less visible, which was exactly what she needed. How far is the ranch? About 5 miles northeast, along the river. You can probably walk it in 2 hours if you are determined, or you can wait until someone heads that direction and hitch a ride. I would like to inquire about the position, Helena said, making her decision quickly. The sooner she had work and a reason to be in Snake River, the sooner she could fade into the background of frontier life. Mrs. Patterson studied her again, and Helena had the uncomfortable feeling that the older woman could see right through her carefully constructed facade. But finally, Mrs. Patterson nodded. You can stay here tonight and head out to the ranch tomorrow morning. I will give you directions. But mind yourself, girl. Carter Quillan is a good man, but he has had his share of sorrow. He does not need more trouble brought to his doorstep. That night, lying in the narrow bed in her rented room, Helena stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about Thomas. But the memories came anyway, as they always did in the darkness. Thomas with his easy smile and his terrible luck at cards. Thomas borrowing money from Marcus Denton, a man with cold eyes and connections to some of Denver's most dangerous criminals. Thomas promising he would pay it back, swearing he just needed one more good hand. And then that night, Thomas lying in a pool of blood on the floor of their small apartment, while Marcus Denton stood over him with a smoking gun and looked at Helena with eyes that promised she would be next if she talked to the law. She had run that very night, taking only what she could carry, using the money Thomas had hidden under a floorboard. Money he had won at cards, he had told her, but she suspected he had stolen it from somewhere. It did not matter now. She had used it to buy her passage west, to put as much distance between herself and Marcus Denton as possible. But she knew men like Denton. They did not forget witnesses, even female witnesses. Even witnesses who had no intention of going to the law because what good would it do? Men like Denton owned pieces of the law in Denver. Thomas had told her that much. So here she was in Snake River, Wyoming, preparing to become a housekeeper for a rancher she had never met, trying to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Mrs. Patterson provided a hearty breakfast of eggs and biscuits, then sent Helena on her way with detailed directions and a canteen of water. The walk to the Quillan Ranch was longer than Helena had expected, the summer sun beating down mercilessly on the dusty road. She was grateful for her bonnet, though her traveling dress was entirely unsuitable for the frontier heat. She would need to buy simpler, more practical clothing if she was going to survive out here. The ranch came into view around mid-morning, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a bend of the Snake River. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a wide porch, clearly built to last through harsh Wyoming winters. Beyond it stood a large barn, several corrals filled with horses, and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands presumably lived. Cattle dotted the hills in every direction, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Helena knew nothing about ranching, but even she could tell this was a substantial operation. As she approached the main house, a dog started barking, and several men emerged from the barn to see who was coming. They were dusty, weathered cowboys with sun-darkened skin and wary expressions. Helena felt their eyes on her and lifted her chin, refusing to show her nervousness. "Can we help you, miss?" one of the men called out. "I am looking for Mr. Quillan," Helena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Patterson in town said he might need a housekeeper." "That's so." The man exchanged glances with his companions. "Boss is out checking the north pasture. Should be back shortly. You can wait on the porch if you like." Helena nodded and made her way to the main house, settling onto the porch steps with her carpetbag beside her. The ranch hands went back to their work, though she could feel them stealing glances at her when they thought she was not looking. She tried to imagine what they saw. A young woman of 22 with dark hair, pale skin that marked her as an Easterner, and clothing too fine for frontier life. She must look completely out of place. She waited for nearly an hour, watching the rhythms of ranch life unfold around her. Men moved cattle from one pasture to another. Horses were led to water. Someone was repairing a fence in the distance. It was hard work, physical labor under an unforgiving sun, and she felt a new respect for the people who had chosen this life. Finally, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a steady gallop. As he drew closer, Helena could make out more details. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, sitting in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. His horse was a magnificent chestnut mare, and he rode her with a light hand that spoke of skill and understanding. When he reached the house, he dismounted in one fluid motion and looped the reins over the porch railing. Then he turned to face Helena, and she felt her breath catch. Carter Quillan was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that touched his collar and intense green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His face was weathered from years of sun and wind, with lines around his eyes and mouth that suggested he had known both laughter and sorrow. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher. Worn denim pants, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, scuffed boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. There was something solid and reassuring about him, but also something guarded, as though he had learned to be cautious about letting people close. "You are the woman Mrs. Patterson sent." His voice was deep, with a slight roughness that sent an unexpected shiver down Helena's spine. "Yes, sir." "My name is Helena Harris. I am looking for work as a housekeeper." Carter removed his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve, studying her with those penetrating green eyes. "I will be honest with you, Miss Harris. This is not an easy position. I have 4 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and during roundup and branding season, we sometimes have a dozen or more men working here. Cooking for that many people is hard work. The house needs cleaning, the laundry needs doing, and there are 100 other tasks that need attention. My last housekeeper, Martha, was with me for 20 years, and she worked from sunup to sundown. I am not afraid of hard work," Helena said, meeting his gaze directly. "Where are you from?" the question she had been dreading. "Philadelphia originally, but I have been living in Denver." "What brings you to Snake River?" Helena had prepared for this. "My husband died 6 months ago. I needed a fresh start, somewhere far from painful memories." She saw something flicker in Carter's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of shared grief. "I am sorry for your loss." "What was your husband's name?" For a moment, Helena's mind went blank. She had not anticipated this question, had not prepared a false name for a false husband. "William," she said finally, choosing her father's name. "William Harris." Carter nodded slowly. "You know anything about ranch life, Mrs. Harris?" "Miss Harris," she corrected without thinking. "I mean, I prefer to be called Miss Harris." She felt her cheeks flush. "And no, I do not know anything about ranches, but I am a quick learner and I promise I will work hard. Mrs. Patterson said you pay fair wages and I need the work. The position includes room and board." There is a small cabin behind the main house that was Martha's. It needs some fixing up, but it is private and comfortable. Wages are $12 a month, plus your meals and supplies. You would work 6 days a week, with Sundays off to attend church or rest as you see fit. $12 a month was more than Helena had expected. Combined with room and board, it would allow her to save money and establish herself. More importantly, it would give her a reason to be here, a story that would satisfy the curious townspeople. "I accept," she said quickly. Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. "You do not want to see the cabin first. Think about it. I trust your word that it is adequate." "When would you like me to start? Are you running from something, Miss Harris?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Helena felt the blood drain from her face, and she gripped her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. What makes you ask that?" Carter's expression was not unkind, but it was serious. "I have lived in Wyoming for 15 years, Miss Harris. I have seen people running from all sorts of things. The law, bad debts, violent husbands, painful pasts. This country attracts people who need a second chance. I am not judging you. But I need to know if whoever or whatever you are running from is going to show up on my doorstep causing trouble." Helena took a shaky breath. She could lie, maintain her carefully constructed story. But something about Carter Quillan's direct gaze and honest words made her want to tell him the truth, or at least part of it. "I am not running from the law. I witnessed something terrible, and I am afraid of the person who did it. Coming here was my attempt to disappear, to be somewhere he would never think to look for me. I swear to you, I am no danger to you or your ranch. I just need a place to hide and heal." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Carter continued to study her, and Helena felt as though he could see every secret she carried. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I believe you. And for what it is worth, Miss Harris, you are welcome here as long as you need a place. I understand about running from violence. I understand about needing a fresh start." The relief that flooded through Helena was so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Come on. I will show you the cabin and introduce you to the hands. We can get you settled today and you can start work tomorrow." Carter picked up her carpetbag before she could protest, carrying it as though it weighed nothing. He led her around the main house to a small log cabin tucked beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. It was a simple structure, just one room with a small porch, but it had windows with real glass and a sturdy door. Inside, the cabin was dusty and clearly had not been used since Martha's death, but Helena could see the potential. There was a narrow bed with a corn husk mattress, a small table and chair, a wood stove for both heating and cooking, and shelves along one wall. A colorful quilt was folded at the foot of the bed, and dried flowers hung from the rafters, remnants of the woman who had lived here before. "I will have one of the hands help you clean it up," Carter said, setting her carpetbag on the table. "And we can get you fresh linens and supplies from the main house. Martha left most of her things here. You are welcome to use whatever you need." "It is perfect," Helena said honestly. The cabin was small, but it was hers. A place where she could close the door and feel safe, at least for a while. Carter showed her around the rest of the property, introducing her to the ranch hands. There was Hank, the foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s who had worked for Carter for over a decade. The younger hands were Tommy, barely 19 with an easy grin, Jake, a quiet man in his 30s with kind eyes, and Louis, who spoke English with a Spanish accent and welcomed Helena warmly. They were all polite, tipping their hats and offering to help her get settled, though she could see the curiosity in their eyes. The main house was larger than it had appeared from outside, with a spacious kitchen, a dining area, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. It was clean enough, but clearly lacked a woman's touch. The kitchen was functional but disorganized, and dust covered every surface. Helena could see she would have her work cut out for her. "I usually take my meals with the hands in the bunkhouse," Carter explained. "But you can cook in this kitchen. It has everything you should need. Martha kept a garden out back, but it has gone wild since she passed. If you want to revive it, you are welcome to." Helena spent the rest of the day cleaning her cabin with Tommy's help. The young cowboy was cheerful and talkative, telling her stories about the ranch and asking her questions about Philadelphia that she answered carefully, volunteering as little information as possible. By the time the sun began to set, the cabin was habitable, with clean floors, fresh linens on the bed, and her few belongings unpacked. That night, exhausted from the long day, Helena lay in her new bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier. Crickets chirped, cattle lowed in the distance, and the river rushed by just beyond the cottonwood trees. It was nothing like the city sound she was used to, the rattle of carriages and the shouts of street vendors. But it was peaceful, and for the first time since that terrible night in Denver, Helena felt like she might be able to sleep without nightmares. The next morning, she woke before dawn and made her way to the main house's kitchen. She had promised Carter she could cook, and she intended to prove it. She found flour, lard, and other basic ingredients, and set about making biscuits, gravy, and eggs. When the hands arrived for breakfast, drawn by the smell of food, they looked surprised to find a proper meal waiting for them. "Well, this is a sight better than what we have been eating," Hank said, loading his plate with generous portions. "You can cook, Miss Harris." "Thank you," Helena said, pleased despite herself. She had been nervous that her skills would not translate to feeding hungry cowboys, but they seemed genuinely appreciative. Carter was the last to arrive, and when he stepped into the kitchen, his eyes widened slightly at the spread of food. "This is impressive, Miss Harris." "It is just breakfast," Helena said, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. "It is a good breakfast," Carter said, filling his own plate. "And it is nice to eat in the house again instead of the bunkhouse." Over the following days, Helena fell into a routine. She woke early to prepare breakfast for the hands, cleaned the main house, did laundry in the large tub behind the kitchen, and cooked supper each evening. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in Philadelphia or Denver, but it was also satisfying. There was something deeply rewarding about taking a dusty, neglected house and bringing it back to life. Carter was a fair employer, as Mrs. Patterson had promised. He never raised his voice, always thanked her for her work, and made sure she had everything she needed. But he was also distant, maintaining a polite but careful boundary between them. He spent most of his time out on the range with the cattle, often coming back after dark covered in dust and exhausted. On those evenings, Helena would leave a plate of food warming on the stove for him, and in the morning, she would find it cleaned and set by the sink with a brief note of thanks. She began to learn more about Carter through observation and the stories the hands told. He had come to Wyoming 15 years ago, young and ambitious, and built his ranch from almost nothing. He had been married once, to a woman named Sarah, but she had died in childbirth along with their baby daughter 7 years ago. Since then, he had thrown himself into his work, building one of the most successful ranches in the region but keeping everyone at arm's length emotionally. "He is a good man, but a lonely one," Jake told Helena one afternoon when she brought water out to the men working on fence repair. "He has not let himself care about anything but this ranch since Sarah died. It is like he is afraid to lose anyone else." Helena understood that fear all too well. She had lost her parents, then Thomas, and the weight of that grief had nearly crushed her. The difference was that Carter had chosen to stay in one place and build something, while she had run. As summer deepened into August, Helena began to feel more settled. The nightmares about Marcus Denton and Thomas's death still came, but less frequently. The hard work tired her body so completely that she slept more soundly than she had in months. The ranch felt safe, isolated enough that she could almost believe she had truly escaped her past. She also began to notice things about Carter that she tried very hard not to notice. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which was rare but beautiful when it happened. The gentleness with which he treated his animals, running his hand along his horse's neck and murmuring soft words. The quiet strength in the way he moved, confident but never aggressive. The sound of his voice when he spoke to her, always respectful, always kind, but with an underlying warmth that made her heart beat faster. She told herself she was being foolish. She was hiding from a murderer, building a life based on half-truths and omissions. She had no business developing feelings for her employer, a man who was clearly still grieving his dead wife. Besides, what could she offer him? She was damaged, frightened, living under a false identity. Carter deserved better than that. But the heart, she was learning, did not always listen to logic. One evening in late August, a storm rolled in from the mountains, dark clouds gathering with ominous speed. Helena was in the kitchen preparing supper when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it had become a deluge, rain pouring down so hard she could barely see the barn through the windows. Carter and the hands came running in from the fields, soaked to the skin. "That came up fast," Hank said, water dripping from his hat. "We got most of the cattle moved to higher ground, but it is going to be a rough night if this keeps up." "The river is going to rise," Carter said, his expression serious. "Tommy, Jake, you two head down and make sure the horses in the lower pasture are secured. Lewis, check the roof on the bunkhouse. We had a leak last spring that I thought we had fixed. Hank, come with me to move the supplies out of the low barn." The men scattered to their tasks, and Helena found herself alone in the kitchen with the sound of rain hammering on the roof. She served supper to the hands when they returned, then set aside a plate for Carter, who had not yet come back. As the evening wore on and the storm intensified, she began to worry. Finally, close to 9 o'clock, Carter stumbled through the door, drenched and exhausted. His shirt was torn and there was a nasty cut on his forearm that was bleeding steadily. "Mr. Quillan," Helena rushed to his side. "You are hurt." "It is nothing," Carter said, though his face was pale. "A board came loose in the wind and caught me. I will clean it up." "Sit down," Helena ordered, surprising herself with her own authority. "Let me look at it." Carter seemed too tired to argue. He sank into a chair by the kitchen table, and Helena brought water, clean cloths, and the medical supplies she had found in the house. The cut was deep and would need stitches, but first she needed to clean it thoroughly. "This is going to hurt," she warned, dipping a cloth in water mixed with carbolic acid. "I have had worse," Carter said, but she felt him tense when she began cleaning the wound. To his credit, he did not make a sound, though she could see the muscles in his jaw working as he gritted his teeth against the pain. "I will need to stitch this," Helena said after examining the cut. "Do you have needle and thread suitable for that? In the box there, yes." Carter's voice was strained. "Have you done this before?" "Once," Helena admitted. "Thomas, my brother, he—" She stopped, realizing her mistake too late. She had claimed to be running from a dead husband, not a dead brother. Carter's eyes met hers, and she saw the realization dawn in them. "Your brother," he said quietly. Helena's hands trembled as she threaded the needle. There was no point in lying now. "Yes, my brother Thomas. I never had a husband named William. Thomas was killed 2 months ago by a man he owed money to, and I witnessed it. That is what I am running from." "Why did you lie?" "Because a woman traveling alone draws suspicion. A widow is more respectable than a sister fleeing a murder." Helena blinked back tears as she began stitching the wound, trying to keep her hands steady. "I am sorry I lied to you. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I repaid you with dishonesty." Carter was silent for a long moment, and Helena could not bring herself to look at his face. She focused on the stitches, making them as neat and even as she could manage, her hands remembering the technique her mother had taught her years ago. "I am not angry," Carter said finally. "I understand why you felt you needed to lie, and I am sorry about your brother." The kindness in his voice broke something inside Helena. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she tied off the last stitch. "I could not save him. I just stood there and watched, too frightened to do anything." "You survived," Carter said gently. "That is what your brother would have wanted." Helena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I am done. You should rest that arm for a few days." "Helena." It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart ache. "Thank you for telling me the truth, and for taking care of this." She finally looked at him and found his green eyes watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was understanding there and something else, something that made her breath catch. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and feelings neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Then Carter stood, breaking the spell. "I should go change into dry clothes. Thank you again, Helena." After he left, Helena cleaned up the medical supplies with shaking hands. She had revealed her secret, but Carter had not judged her for it. If anything, he seemed to understand. The knowledge should have been comforting, but instead it terrified her. The more Carter understood about her, the more he seemed to see through her defenses, the harder it became to maintain the emotional distance she needed to protect herself. The storm continued through the night, and by morning, the Snake River had swollen its banks. Several cattle had been swept away, and one section of fence was completely destroyed. Carter and the hands spent the next 2 weeks dealing with the aftermath, working from dawn until well after dark to repair the damage. During this time, Helena found herself watching Carter more closely than she should. She saw how he pushed himself to exhaustion, how he always made sure his men ate before he did, how he checked on every animal personally even when he could barely stay upright. She saw the weight he carried, the responsibility for the ranch and everyone on it. And she saw the loneliness, the careful walls he had built around himself to avoid being hurt again. She recognized those walls because she had built similar ones herself. One evening, Carter came in after dark to find his supper waiting as usual. But this time, Helena had not left to go back to her cabin. She was sitting at the kitchen table, mending one of his torn shirts by lamplight. "You do not have to do that," Carter said, surprised to find her there. The shirt was torn. It needed mending. Helena kept her eyes on her sewing. "And I wanted to make sure you actually ate your supper while it was still warm instead of letting it sit until midnight." A small smile tugged at the corner of Carter's mouth. "Are you scolding me, Miss Harris?" "Someone needs to," Helena said, allowing herself a slight smile in return. "You work yourself too hard. The ranch requires it. The ranch would suffer far more if you collapsed from exhaustion." Helena set down her mending and met his eyes. "You take care of everyone else." "Who takes care of you?" The question seemed to catch Carter off guard. He sat down at the table, suddenly looking very tired. "I manage." "That is not the same as being taken care of," Helena said softly. She stood and dished up his supper, setting it before him along with fresh coffee. "Eat, please." Carter ate in silence while Helena returned to her mending. It was a comfortable silence, domestic and peaceful, and Helena realized with a start that she felt happy. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something other than fear and grief. It was a dangerous feeling, this happiness, because it made her want things she had no right to want. "Why did you stay?" Carter asked suddenly. "You could have gone back to your cabin." "I thought you might like the company," Helena said honestly. "I know what it is like to be alone with your grief. Sometimes it helps to have another person nearby, even if you do not talk." Carter's eyes searched her face, and Helena felt that same electric awareness she had experienced the night she had stitched his arm. "You are not what I expected, Helena Harris." "What did you expect?" "I do not know, but not this, not you." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "You make this house feel like a home again. I had forgotten what that was like." Helena's heart hammered in her chest. She should say something neutral, something that would re-establish the professional boundaries between them. Instead, she heard herself say, "You make me feel safe." I had forgotten what that was like. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Carter set down his fork and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She could see him warring with himself, feel the pull between them like a physical force. "Helena," he said, his voice rough. "We should not." "I know," Helena whispered. "But I cannot seem to help it." Carter stood, and for a moment Helena thought he might cross the distance between them. But instead he grabbed his hat and headed for the door. "I need to check on something in the barn. Thank you for supper." He was gone before Helena could respond, leaving her alone with her racing heart, and the knowledge that everything between them had just shifted irrevocably. Over the following weeks, the tension between Helena and Carter grew. They were unfailingly polite to each other, but there was an awareness now, a careful dance around the attraction they both felt but neither acknowledged. Helena caught Carter watching her sometimes, his green eyes dark with something that made her skin tingle. And she knew he caught her looking at him just as often, though they always looked away when their eyes met. The ranch hands noticed, of course. They were not subtle about their speculation, though they were careful not to say anything within Carter's hearing. Hank, in particular, seemed pleased by the development, often finding excuses to leave Carter and Helena alone together. In September, Carter needed to make a trip into Snake River for supplies, and he asked Helena if she wanted to accompany him. It was the first time she had been back to town since her arrival, and she felt nervous about showing her face where people might ask questions. But Carter seemed to want her company, and she found she could not refuse him. The ride into town was beautiful, the Wyoming landscape ablaze with fall colors. They rode in Carter's wagon, sitting close together on the bench seat, and talked about inconsequential things. Helena told him about Philadelphia, carefully editing out details that might reveal too much. Carter told her about his early days in Wyoming, when he had worked as a ranch hand for other people before saving enough to buy his own land. "I had nothing when I came here," Carter said. "I was 18, running from my own past. My father was a drunk who beat my mother. One night I fought back and I thought I had killed him. I left Virginia that night and headed west. Later I learned he had survived, but by then I had built a new life here. I never went back." Helena listened, understanding the parallels between their stories. "Do you ever regret it, leaving?" "Not for a moment," Carter said firmly. "Sometimes running is the only way to survive. There is no shame in that, Helena. No shame in choosing yourself when staying would destroy you." The words felt like absolution, and Helena blinked back tears. "Thank you for telling me that." In Snake River, they completed their errands quickly. Carter introduced Helena to the shopkeepers as his housekeeper, and she could see the speculation in their eyes. Mrs. Patterson, in particular, looked pleased, as though she had known all along that something would develop between them. As they were loading supplies into the wagon, a stranger approached them. He was a well-dressed man, out of place in the frontier town, with sharp eyes that reminded Helena uncomfortably of Marcus Denton. "Excuse me," the stranger said. "I am looking for someone." A woman named Helena Harris, or possibly Helena Morton. She would have come through here in July. Dark hair about this tall, traveling alone. Helena's blood turned to ice. She kept her face carefully neutral, but inside, panic was screaming. Had Marcus Denton sent someone to find her? How had they tracked her to Snake River? "We have not seen anyone by that name," Carter said smoothly, stepping slightly in front of Helena. "Sorry, we cannot help you." The stranger's eyes lingered on Helena for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze with polite indifference. Finally, he tipped his hat and walked away, but Helena knew this was far from over. "We need to leave," Carter said quietly, urgency in his voice. "Now." They climbed into the wagon, and Carter drove out of town at a faster pace than necessary. Helena sat rigid beside him, her mind racing. How had they found her? Had someone in Denver remembered her mentioning Wyoming? Or had Marcus simply hired people to search every town within a certain radius? "Helena," Carter said when they were well outside of town. "Who was that man?" "I do not know," Helena said honestly. "But he must be working for Marcus Denton, the man who killed Thomas. Why would he still be looking for you after 2 months?" Helena swallowed hard. "Because I saw him kill Thomas. I am the only witness. If I testify, he could hang. But more than that, Marcus. He told me that night that I belonged to him now, that Thomas's debt had passed to me. I think he wants to force me to work off the debt, or—" She could not finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Carter's hands tightened on the reins, his jaw clenching. "He is not going to touch you." "I will make sure of that." "Carter, you do not understand what kind of man Marcus is. He has connections, money, and no conscience. If he has sent someone here, it is only a matter of time before they find me." "Then we will deal with it when the time comes," Carter said firmly. "But you are not going back to him, Helena. I will not allow it." The protectiveness in his voice made Helena's heart ache. "This is not your fight." "It is if I choose to make it my fight." Carter looked at her, his green eyes intense. "You are not alone anymore, Helena. You have people here who care about you, who will stand with you." Back at the ranch, Carter gathered the hands and explained the situation. To Helena's amazement, every one of them immediately pledged their support. "No one is going to take Miss Helena anywhere she does not want to go," Hank said firmly. "Not while we are around." "We will take turns keeping watch," Carter decided. "Someone should always be near the house, just in case. And Helena, I want you to stay close to the ranch for now. No more walks down by the river alone." The next few days were tense, everyone waiting for something to happen. Helena tried to continue her normal routine, but she could not shake the feeling of being watched. She knew Marcus Denton. If he wanted something, he did not give up until he got it. The stranger from town was probably still in the area, asking questions, looking for information. Then, 4 days after the encounter in Snake River, the stranger appeared at the ranch. Helena was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a horse approaching. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. It was the man from town, and this time he had 2 others with him. Carter was in the barn with Hank and Jake. Tommy was out riding fence and Lewis was in the bunkhouse. Helena knew she should stay inside, stay hidden, but something made her walk out onto the porch. If this was inevitable, she wanted to face it head-on. The stranger dismounted and tipped his hat to her, a gesture that was mockingly polite. "Miss Harris. Or should I say Miss Morton? We know who you are." "My name is Helena Harris," she said, keeping her voice steady, "and you are trespassing on private property." "I am here on behalf of Marcus Denton," the man said. "He wants you to return to Denver. There is the matter of a debt to settle." I do not owe Marcus Denton anything. Your brother did, and debts do not die with the debtor." The stranger smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Denton is prepared to be reasonable. Come back to Denver and we can work out an arrangement." "By arrangement, you mean he wants to own me," Helena said, anger rising above her fear. "Force me to work in one of his establishments until I have paid off a debt that never existed in the first place. Thomas lost money gambling, yes, but he had already paid it back. Marcus killed him for sport because he could." "That is a serious accusation," the stranger said, his voice hardening, "and one you would be foolish to repeat. Mr. Denton is a respected businessman in Denver." "Mr. Denton is a murderer and a criminal," Helena shot back. The stranger's expression turned ugly. "You are coming back with me one way or another, the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. The lady has made her choice, and it does not involve you." Carter's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the barn, a rifle held loosely in his hands. Hank and Jake flanked him, also armed. "Time for you and your friends to leave." The stranger assessed the situation, clearly calculating his odds. "This is not your concern, rancher. This is a matter between Mr. Denton and Miss Morton." "Miss Harris works for me," Carter said, his voice like steel. "That makes it my concern, and she has told you she is not going anywhere. So I am going to give you one chance to get on your horses and ride out of here. If you come back, I will treat you as threats to my property and act accordingly." For a long moment, the stranger stared at Carter, weighing his options. But 3 armed cowboys were apparently more than he wanted to handle. "This is not over," he finally said. "Mr. Denton always collects his debts. Tell Mr. Denton that if he sets foot in Wyoming, he will answer to me," Carter said coldly. "And he will find that justice works a bit differently out here than it does in Denver." The strangers mounted their horses and rode away, but their parting words hung in the air like a threat. Helena stood on the porch, trembling with reaction now that the confrontation was over. Carter set down his rifle and came to her side, his hand gentle on her arm. "Are you all right?" "He will not stop," Helena whispered. "Marcus never gives up. He will send more men or he will come himself, and I cannot let you and your hands get hurt because of me. Maybe I should just leave, go somewhere farther away." "No," Carter's voice was firm. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You are not running again, Helena. You are not alone in this. We will figure something out, but I am not letting you face this by yourself." "Why?" Helena asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Carter's green eyes held hers, and in them she saw the answer before he spoke it. "Because I love you. I know I should not. I know it is too soon, and I know this is complicated and dangerous. But I love you, Helena. I think I have loved you since that first day when you sat on my porch looking so determined and terrified all at once. So no, I am not letting you face this alone. We face it together, or not at all." The words broke through every defense Helena had built around her heart. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around Carter's neck, and kissed him with all the fear and hope and love she had been holding back. He responded immediately, his arms coming around her waist and pulling her close, kissing her back with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Carter rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "So have I," Helena admitted. "But Carter, loving me puts you in danger. Marcus Denton is not going to give up." "Then we need to make sure he has no reason to come after you," Carter said. "What if we can prove that Thomas had already paid back his debt? Or better yet, what if we can prove that Marcus killed him? Do you know anyone in Denver who might help us?" Helena thought for a moment. Thomas had a friend, Andrew Chen. He ran a general store in the Chinese Quarter. He knew about Thomas's dealings with Marcus. He might be willing to testify, or at least tell us if there is evidence we can use." "Then I will go to Denver and talk to him," Carter decided. "Absolutely not," Helena said firmly. "Marcus will have people watching for anyone asking questions. It is too dangerous." "So is sitting here waiting for him to send more men," Carter pointed out. "Helena, we need to end this. And the only way to do that is to make sure Marcus Denton faces justice for what he did." They argued about it well into the evening, but eventually, Helena reluctantly agreed that Carter was right. They could not simply wait and hope Marcus would forget about her. They needed to take the offensive. Over the next week, they made plans. Carter would travel to Denver with Jake, who had experience dealing with unsavory characters from his own past. They would find Andrew Chen and see what evidence could be gathered against Marcus Denton. Meanwhile, Hank, Tommy, and Lewis would stay at the ranch to protect Helena. The night before Carter was due to leave, Helena could not sleep. She lay in her cabin bed, staring at the ceiling, terrified that something would happen to him in Denver. Finally, unable to bear the solitude, she pulled a shawl around her shoulders and walked to the main house. She found Carter sitting on the porch, also unable to sleep. He stood when he saw her approaching, concern on his face. "Helena, what is wrong?" "I am scared," she admitted. "I am scared of what might happen to you in Denver. I am scared that Marcus will kill you like he killed Thomas. I am scared of losing you." Carter pulled her into his arms, and Helena buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and soap and the outdoors. "I am scared too," he admitted quietly, "but I am more scared of losing you, of letting Marcus Denton take you from me without a fight." Helena looked up at him, and in the moonlight his face was beautiful and dear. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I did not want to. I tried so hard not to, but I love you, Carter Quillan." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips. Helena pulled back, startled. "What? Marry me?" Carter repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I am 30 years old, Helena. I have been alone for 7 years, and I was starting to think I would be alone forever. Then you walked into my life and everything changed. You make me want to be brave again. You make me want to risk my heart. So marry me. Not today, not even next month. But when this is all over, when Marcus Denton is in jail where he belongs, marry me and be my wife." Tears streamed down Helena's face, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood on the porch holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who had been running from their pasts, finally finding a reason to stop and build a future. Carter left for Denver the next morning, and the ranch felt empty without him. Helena threw herself into her work, trying not to count the days until his return. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, reorganized the kitchen, and even started reviving the overgrown garden. Anything to keep her mind occupied and her hands busy. 2 weeks passed with no word. Then 3. Helena tried not to panic, but every day that went by without news made her more anxious. What if something had happened to Carter and Jake? What if Marcus had killed them? Finally, on a cold October morning, she saw riders approaching. Her heart leaped, then sank when she realized it was not Carter. It was the sheriff from Snake River, accompanied by 2 men she did not recognize. Helena stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding. "Sheriff Cooper." "What brings you out here?" The sheriff dismounted, removing his hat respectfully. "Miss Harris, I have news from Denver. May we come in?" Helena led them into the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared coffee. "Is it about Mr. Quillan? Is he—" "He is fine," the sheriff assured her quickly. "Alive and well, but there have been some developments you need to know about." One of the strangers stepped forward. He was a solid man with gray hair and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Miss Harris, my name is Marshal William Grant. I work out of Denver. Mr. Quillan came to me 3 weeks ago with information about a murder committed by Marcus Denton. With his help and the testimony of a Mr. Andrew Chen and several other witnesses, we have been able to build a case against Denton for multiple crimes, including murder, extortion, and human trafficking." Helena sank into a chair, barely able to process what she was hearing. "Marcus has been arrested 4 days ago," Marshal Grant confirmed. "He is currently in jail in Denver awaiting trial. The evidence against him is substantial, and I am confident he will be convicted. But we need your testimony as well, Miss Harris. You are the only witness to Thomas Morton's murder." "I will testify," Helena said immediately. "Whatever you need." "There is one more thing," the sheriff said gently. "Mr. Quillan was shot during the arrest. He is recovering, but he asked me to come tell you in person so you would not worry." Helena's world tilted. "Shot? How badly?" The bullet went through his shoulder. "Painful, but not life-threatening. The doctor in Denver says he should make a full recovery." "I need to go to him," Helena said, standing abruptly. "Right now." "I figured you would say that," Sheriff Cooper said with a slight smile. "I have a wagon ready. We can leave within the hour if you can pack quickly." Helena packed in a blur, her mind focused on one thing: getting to Carter. The journey to Denver took 3 days, and every mile felt like an eternity. When they finally arrived, Marshal Grant took her directly to the boarding house where Carter was recuperating. She flew up the stairs and burst into his room without knocking. Carter was sitting up in bed, his shoulder bandaged, looking pale but alive. His face lit up when he saw her. "Helena." She crossed the room in 3 strides and threw her arms around him, careful of his injured shoulder, sobbing with relief. "You idiot. You wonderful, brave, stupid idiot. You got shot." "It is just a scratch," Carter said, though his voice was strained. He wrapped his good arm around her and held her tight. "I am fine, love, I promise." "You better be," Helena said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "Because I am going to marry you, and I expect my husband to live a long, healthy life." Carter smiled, the full, genuine smile she so rarely saw but loved so much. "Is that an order?" "Absolutely." Helena kissed him gently, mindful of his injury. "No more getting shot." "That is my first rule as your future wife." "I will do my best," Carter promised. Over the next 2 weeks, Helena gave her testimony to the marshal and the prosecutor. It was difficult, reliving that terrible night when Thomas died, but she forced herself through it. Marcus Denton needed to face justice, not just for Thomas's sake, but for all the other people he had hurt over the years. Andrew Chen was instrumental in building the case. He had kept meticulous records of Thomas's payments to Marcus, proving that Thomas had indeed paid back his gambling debt in full. He also testified about other people Marcus had threatened and extorted, and several women came forward with stories of being forced to work in Marcus's establishments against their will. The trial was brief, but intense. Marcus Denton, for all his swagger and connections, could not escape the weight of evidence against him. Helena testified on the final day, looking him in the eye as she described how he had shot Thomas in cold blood. Marcus glared at her with pure hatred, but she did not flinch. She was done being afraid of him. The jury took less than 2 hours to return a verdict of guilty on all counts. Marcus Denton was sentenced to hang. When it was over, Helena stood outside the courthouse with Carter beside her, his arm in a sling but his presence solid and reassuring. "It is really over," she whispered, barely able to believe it. "It is over," Carter confirmed. He turned to face her, taking her hand in his. "You are free, Helena. Free to go wherever you want, be whoever you want. You do not have to hide anymore." "I know where I want to be," Helena said, squeezing his hand. "With you, on the ranch, building a life together, Are you sure? You could go back to Philadelphia, back to civilization. The frontier is hard and it is not for everyone. I am sure, Helena said firmly. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. The ranch is my home now. You are my home. They were married in Snake River on a crisp November day, with the whole town turning out for the celebration. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears, declaring she had known from the start that Helena and Carter were meant for each other. The ranch hands dressed in their best clothes and good-naturedly teased Carter about finally getting married again. Even Sheriff Cooper made an appearance, bringing a beautiful set of china as a wedding gift. Helena wore a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Patterson had sewn together, and she carried wildflowers that grew along the Snake River. Carter wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but the look in his eyes when he saw Helena walking toward him down the aisle of the little church made her heart soar. They exchanged vows in front of the whole community, promising to love and cherish each other through all the challenges life might bring. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Carter kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. The celebration afterward was joyous and loud, with food and music and dancing. Helena laughed more that day than she had in years, surrounded by people who had become her friends and family. These were good people, hardworking and honest, and they had accepted her completely despite her past. As the sun set and the stars came out, Carter led Helena away from the party to a quiet spot overlooking the river. "Are you happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Helena said honestly. "A few months ago, I was running for my life with nothing but fear and grief. Now I have a home, a community, and a husband I love more than anything. It feels like a miracle." "You are the miracle," Carter said softly. "You brought life back to my ranch and my heart. I had given up on ever feeling this way again, and then you walked into my life and changed everything." They stood together watching the stars, two people who had been broken by their pasts finding healing in each other's love. Life on the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Helena continued to manage the household, though now she had help from a young woman named Mary who came in twice a week to assist with the heavier work. The ranch prospered under Carter's skilled management, and they were able to hire additional hands and expand their operations. The first winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Helena found she did not mind. There was something deeply satisfying about battling the elements alongside Carter, working together to keep the ranch running and the animals safe. They spent long evenings by the fireplace, Helena sewing or reading while Carter worked on the ranch's accounts, their comfortable silence speaking of deep companionship. In the spring, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Carter on a morning when the meadows were covered in wildflowers and new calves were being born in the pastures. He picked her up and spun her around, his joy so intense it made her laugh and cry at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." Helena's pregnancy was not easy. She was often sick in the early months, and Carter fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement and occasional annoyance. But she loved seeing this protective side of him, the way he worried about her health and insisted she rest more. In December of 1880, on a snowy night when the world was quiet and still, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Carter Quillan, after both of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Carter held his son with tears streaming down his face, all the grief he had carried for his first lost child finally finding release in joy. "He is perfect," Carter whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." Helena watched her husband with their son and felt her heart overflow. This was everything she had never dared to hope for: a family, A home, a future. Thomas was a happy, healthy baby who grew quickly. He had Carter's green eyes and Helena's dark hair, and from the moment he could crawl, he was fascinated by the ranch. By the time he was 2, he was toddling after his father, trying to help with the chores in his clumsy, endearing way. 2 years after Thomas was born, Helena had a daughter they named Sarah Grace, after Carter's first wife, and as a reminder that love could grow from grief. Sarah was a sweet, gentle child who loved flowers and singing, and watching Carter with his daughter healed something in both of them. Another son, James, came 3 years later, robust and loud and fearless from the day he was born. He kept everyone on their toes with his adventurous spirit and boundless energy. As the years passed, the ranch continued to thrive. Carter became one of the most respected ranchers in Wyoming, known for his fair dealings and skilled handling of cattle. Helena became a pillar of the Snake River community, organizing church socials and helping new families get established on the frontier. Together, they built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of kindness and hard work. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed, and they sat together on the porch watching the sunset over the Wyoming plains, Helena would sometimes think back to that terrified woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Snake River 7 years ago. She had been running from her past, broken and afraid, convinced she would never feel safe or happy again. "What are you thinking about?" Carter would ask, pulling her closer. "How far we have come," Helena would answer. "How lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Carter would say, kissing her temple. "I was dying inside before you came along. I did not even realize how much I had shut myself off until you opened my heart again." Helena thought about Thomas sometimes too, her beloved brother who had made terrible choices but had loved her in his own flawed way. She hoped he would be proud of the life she had built, the way she had taken the tragedy of his death and transformed it into something beautiful and lasting. When Thomas was 10, Sarah 7, and James 5, Helena gave birth to twin girls they named Grace and Rose. The ranch house was constantly filled with noise and laughter, with children running through the rooms and the sounds of a large, happy family. Carter hired more help so Helena would not be overwhelmed, but she loved every chaotic moment of raising their children. The children grew up learning the rhythms of ranch life. Thomas became a skilled horseman like his father, serious and responsible even as a boy. Sarah had a gift with animals and could gentle the wildest colt with patience and soft words. James was the adventurer, always exploring and getting into mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing secrets in their own special language. As Helena approached her 40th birthday, she looked around at the life she had built and felt profound gratitude. The ranch was prosperous, the children were healthy and happy, and Carter still looked at her with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding day. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, illness and injury, the everyday challenges of frontier life, but they had weathered them together. One evening, when the children were old enough to help run the ranch and the house was finally quiet, Helena and Carter took a walk down to the Snake River, just as they had done on so many evenings over the years. The water rushed by, constant and eternal, and the stars blazed overhead in the clear Wyoming sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Helena asked. "Taking me in when you knew I was running from trouble. Your life would have been simpler without me." Carter stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Helena Quillan, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You brought me back to life. You gave me a family and a reason to wake up happy every morning. I would choose you again and again in any life under any circumstances. You are my everything." Helena kissed him, this man who had given her not just shelter and protection, but genuine love and partnership. "And you gave me a future worth remembering," she said softly. "When I came here, I was just trying to survive. You taught me how to live again." They stood by the river holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the frontier and built something that would last forever. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with lamplight, full of the children they had made and the life they had created together. It was not the life Helena had imagined in her privileged Philadelphia childhood or during her desperate flight from Denver. It was better. It was real and hard-won and precious beyond measure. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Helena reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her here. Marcus Denton had wanted to destroy her, to own her, to make her suffer for witnessing his crime. Instead, his cruelty had driven her into the arms of the man who would become her great love. Evil had intended harm, but good had triumphed, turning her fear into courage and her grief into joy. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons. Thomas grew into a fine young man and eventually took over much of the ranch's operations, freeing Carter to slow down a bit as he aged. He married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Helena and Carter their first grandchildren. Sarah married a veterinarian who had moved to Snake River, and they built a practice together, caring for animals throughout the region. James joined the territorial government, his adventurous spirit finding expression in helping shape Wyoming's future. The twins both became teachers, establishing a proper school in Snake River that served the growing community. Through it all, Helena and Carter remained at the heart of the family, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together gracefully, their hair turning gray and their faces weathering with the years, but the spark between them never dimmed. Carter still made Helena's heart race with a single look. Helena could still make Carter laugh like no one else could. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the ranch house that had been the center of their life together, Carter stood to make a toast. His hair was white now, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, but his green eyes were still bright and alert. 30 years ago, Carter said, his voice carrying easily over the crowd of family. A frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach in Snake River looking for a place to hide from her past. I was a lonely rancher who had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond the next season's calves and the next winter's survival. We were both broken in our own ways, both carrying grief and fear that we thought would never heal. He turned to look at Helena, and the love in his eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. But Helena taught me something I had forgotten. She taught me that it is never too late to start over. It is never too late to be brave. It is never too late to open your heart and take a chance on love, even when everything in your past tells you it will only lead to pain. Carter crossed to Helena and took her hand, pulling her to her feet beside him. "You gave me everything, Helena. You gave me this family, this life, this love that has sustained me through every challenge. You made my house a home and my life worth living. I was hiding from the future, convinced I had nothing left to hope for. You gave me a future worth remembering." Helena smiled through her tears, standing on her toes to kiss her husband while their family applauded and cheered around them. "We gave each other a future," she corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you." As the celebration continued around them, Helena looked at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the ranch that had been built with love and hard work, at the man who had stood beside her through 3 decades of life on the frontier. She thought about that frightened girl who had arrived in Snake River with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope, and she marveled at the transformation. She had been hiding from her past, running from violence and grief and fear. Carter had offered her shelter, but he had given her so much more than that. He had given her a place to belong, a reason to stop running, a love that had healed her broken heart and given her the courage to build something lasting and beautiful. The frontier had been harsh and unforgiving, just as everyone had warned. But it had also been magnificent. It had stripped away everything false and left only what was real and true. Her love for Carter, his love for her, the family they had built together, the community they had become part of. The land that had demanded everything from them but had given back even more. Helena Quillan looked around the crowded room at the life she had created and felt complete. She had come to Wyoming broken and afraid, seeking only to disappear. Instead, she had found herself. She had found her purpose. She had found her home. Most importantly, she had found love in the arms of a lonely rancher who had needed her just as desperately as she had needed him. As the evening wound down and their family began to depart, Helena and Carter stood on the porch of their home, watching the stars come out one by one. The Snake River rushed by in the darkness, its constant song a reminder that life moved forward, always flowing toward the future. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Quillan," Carter said softly, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Quillan," Helena replied, leaning into his embrace. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had learned long ago that the best conversations often happened without words. The ranch was quiet now, the day's work done. The children and grandchildren returned to their own homes. It was just the two of them again, as it had been at the beginning, bound together by love and shared history, and the simple joy of being in each other's presence. Helena thought about all the years that had passed, all the moments both ordinary and extraordinary that had made up their life together. The birth of their children, the first steps and first words, the long days of hard work and the peaceful evenings of rest. The laughter and tears, the struggles and triumphs, the thousand small kindnesses that had woven their lives together into something unbreakable. She had been so afraid when she came here, convinced that Marcus Denton would find her and destroy the fragile new life she was trying to build. But he had not. Justice had prevailed, and she had been free to become the person she was meant to be. Not a victim, not someone defined by tragedy and fear, but a woman who had faced her demons and come out stronger. A wife, mother, grandmother, a pillar of her community. A partner to a man she loved with her whole heart. "I love you," Helena said, the words as natural as breathing after 30 years of marriage. "I love you too," Carter replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." They walked inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever years remained to them. The future stretched out before them, unknown but unafraid. They had weathered so much together, built so much together. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Side by side, their love a constant flame against the darkness. The ranch house settled into stillness as they prepared for bed. The familiar routines of a long marriage comfortable and reassuring. Helena brushed out her hair, now threaded with silver, while Carter checked the locks on the doors and windows. Habits formed during those early days when they had been watching for Marcus Denton's men. They no longer needed such precautions, but some habits were too ingrained to break. When they finally lay down together, Carter pulled Helena close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was the same heart that had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go. The same heart that had loved her through fear and uncertainty and all the challenges of frontier life. The same heart that had given her a home. "Thank you," Helena whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Carter asked, his voice drowsy. "For everything. for giving me a chance when I was running scared, for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me a future worth remembering." Carter tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart, for staying even when it was hard, for making me believe in love again." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their way home to each other across the vast Wyoming frontier. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, the river rushed by, and the ranch slept peacefully under the watchful eye of the distant mountains. Helena's last thought before sleep claimed her was one of profound gratitude. She had been hiding from her past, broken and afraid, when a lonely rancher had given her not just shelter, but a future full of love and purpose and joy. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, more than she had ever thought possible. And it had all started with one brave decision to step off a stagecoach in a tiny Wyoming town and take a chance on something new. That choice had changed everything. It had saved her life and given her a love that would last forever. She had been hiding from her past. The lonely rancher had given her a future worth remembering. And together, they had built something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward into the future. It was, Helena thought as sleep finally claimed her, the best possible ending to her story. And the best possible beginning to all the stories that would come after.